let's listen to President Obama came out and gave a, I don't know if it's a press conference really, is like a short impromptu,
Pretty
and it seemed
passionate speech.
very passionate.
Yeah.
It seemed more or less, I don't know, off the cuff, at least on some level. This is his response to the shooting in Roseburg, Oregon, at the Umpqua Community College. 9 victims. The perpetrator was ultimately killed. The gunman ultimately killed. 7 injured. And here is President Obama addressing that.
But as I said just a few months ago, and I said a few months before that, and I said each time we see one of these mass shootings, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It's not enough. It does not capture the heartache and grief and anger that we should feel. And it does nothing to prevent this carnage from being inflicted someplace else in America. Next week, or a couple of months from now. We don't yet know why this individual did what he did. And it's fair to say that anybody who does this has a sickness in their minds, regardless of what they think their motivations may be. But we are not the only country on earth that has people with mental illnesses or want to do harm to other people. We are the only advanced country on earth that sees these kinds of mass shootings every few months.
So there he is. I mean, he is basically expressing, the idea that you were expressing, Cliff, which is that we're not even trying anymore. There's
Right.
not even, I mean, there's some empty platitudes, but as a country, we're not trying to address this problem, which is clearly not going away and is in fact growing. And, later in the speech, he also compares it to the literally the billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. He doesn't say it explicitly, but also the rollback in our civil liberties that we've been engaged in since 9/11 in terms, and not to mention the wars, right? Ostensibly to protect us from terrorism. And we spend all that effort on that, but as far as something that actually on a daily, week in, week out basis, year in, year out basis, kills Americans in much the same way, right? A random, completely random civilian in the most sort of benign settings kills more Americans. We do absolutely nothing.
And people are at so much more of a risk from this happening than terrorism, which President Obama also mentioned. And some people then looked and compared the graphs, which, I mean, you can barely have the lines on the same chart. There's so much more gun violence, death. And, again, I mean, the reason why I've said this before, I mean, there's a number of reasons why there's hope on this and why we're headed very much in the right direction. The problem is, when you're headed very much in the right direction on gay marriage, it's terrible, but that means people aren't allowed to get married who are gay during that period of time. They're not allowed to have equality. And in some cases, it may cause some people, I mean, it can cause if you can't get health care because you don't have your partner's benefits. I'm not saying there can't be terrible effects of it, and it can even cause some people to die. But in this case, the direct relationship is while we are passing these laws, while Washington State, passes universal background checks as they did on their, by ballot initiative last time, and Oregon, by the way, passed it. It just hadn't taken effect. It just took effect. But they passed it through their legislature, and Delaware passed it through their legislature. And it's going to be on the ballot in Nevada and Maine, among potentially other places coming up in 2016. there's change going in the right direction. Moms Demand Action has gotten numerous businesses to not allow guns in their stores. Well, when you think of all the accidental deaths, all the times when, mom leaves the gun in the purse, the kid takes it out and just randomly starts shooting, or, things like that, or how to know if somebody is a bad person or not,
Right.
because they're carrying a gun and the store doesn't allow it, that saved lives. And it's not to say we're not making change, but the problem with this issue, which I think makes people feel powerless and that things aren't changing, is this is the inevitability, as I've said, numerous times on the show, is that during the 10 years, 20 years, during the period of time it takes, because again, the group that I worked with, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, that's now Every Town for Gun Safety, got into this in 2006 is when they started. And before that, there was nothing. There's the myth that we lost Congress in '94 because of this issue. Not true. As Paul Waldman, who's now at the Plumb Line and the American Prospect, did research to show. In 2000, the myth was that that's why Al Gore lost, even though we know he kind of really won. And again, not this issue that cost him some of those places. Those places were moving in a rightward direction anyhow, West Virginia and some of those areas, and a whole number of issues. So, the left completely backed away from this issue. And just, for about 6 years there, which is a really long time if you think about it, nobody in the left mentioned this issue except for a few stragglers. And the right was pushing us in a direction of more concealed carry, more open carry, more concealed carry in ridiculous places like bars and in preschools and, all this kind of crazy stuff like that. So really for less than a decade now, there's been any kind of countervailing force. And of course, that's been increasing as the Brady campaign, which existed but wasn't doing much then, has jumped back into this more heavily. They were concentrating on the courts for a while there and weren't doing anything politically. And now, they're back into it. And you've got Moms Demand Action, who joined with Every Town, but so you've got a grassroots component. 90% of what the NRA tried to push this year, over 90%, it was like 92%, in the states, they've lost. All right? They're losing everything now. I mean, one could make the argument and say, well, granted, because they're doing really, really crazy stuff, like trying to put guns in more campuses where they failed almost everywhere. But the point is that, there's a lot going in the right direction, but I guess I keep saying this again and again. The problem is that there's all these loopholes in the meantime, because It's great that California and New York and some big states have closed all this stuff, and that's a large percentage of American people. But when you've got places like Texas and Florida, and virtually every small state that isn't doing anything, this is what happens.